The Rockpile Report, the pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bills season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And it's a pretty rough week to be a Buffalo Bills content creator. I mean, I will say this. First of all, anybody who goes out there and tries to paint themselves as some sort of a Do you
want one of these Eclipse cookies? It's got a smile on it. It's the sun. Brighten your day over at Vox Media.
Chris was dumb enough to go purchase.
Yeah.
Was dumb enough to go purchase. I like that you just threw a cookie like a baseball and somehow it didn't just explode on contact. I had a nightmare of me reaching out to grab this cookie and it just exploding on my hands like a grenade.
Well, it kind of did. There's crumbs everywhere on the table.
You know, this is how you podcast professionally, folks. You throw food in a studio and you also eat on camera. So, we'll get into the Eclipse cookie later. We've got a bigger cookie to crumble, as Bruce Nolan might say.
Yeah.
It's a really rough day. First of all, content creation is not a real job. Anybody who says it is lazy, or at least anyone who complains about it is lazy. But that doesn't mean that there's not a part of yourself that you're putting into it. All right. And so that's why this week's Bills news update, or at least Bills content news update, is so hard to deliver.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Now, I'm going to warn you. There's a bit of a disclaimer for everybody who downloaded this podcast. For those of you who don't think I get to the show fast enough, here's a disclaimer. If you don't like conversation about the art form, and it almost feels lame, like I just cringed saying art form when I'm talking about us sitting here slamming booze and yelling about football. This episode is going to be focused on what just took place and kind of some of the inside baseball on it and just my own personal feelings about what just took place in the Bills content creation community. I'm hoping that some of them find some catharsis in what I'm about to say, or at least some understanding. And I hope those of you who don't understand it gain an understanding and hopefully are just as pissed as they maybe should be about all this. On April 4th, Vox Media slammed the door on SB Nation's podcast network. And that left the Buffalo Rumblings podcast community without a home. You know, it just unceremoniously shuttered. Now, I want to start with this. There are some times when I think about what I do for a living and I regret not doing more to pursue journalism as a profession. Right? Like the work that I put in to create this podcast, it comes from somewhere. Like I went to school and obtained a degree in journalism specifically because I cared about this. The aggregation of information, how you craft a story, entertaining people, informing people, sharing of opinions. This hasn't been one of those weeks. Like, there are times when I get that emotion if I'm like, man, I really wish that I was more ingrained in this, that I could be doing this professionally. And then I see things like this and it reminds me of all the reasons I got out of it. A whole network of podcasters, Chris, was fired with zero notice. The email that they received, it almost didn't beat the tweet announcing the decisions to Twitter. Imagine if you were to get fired and the way you found out is one of your friends texted you and said, hey, I saw online that your company just laid everyone off. You'd be probably kind of pissed, right?
Oh, yeah.
So imagine the feeling of knowing that you were deemed so easily discardable by an organization that you've put a lot of work into, some for yourself, some on their behalf. Most of which, like, your endeavors are mostly lining their pockets, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. They can discard you that quickly, almost as if you didn't exist. Now, a lot of these guys are better people than me, Chris, because a lot of them have chosen to take the high road.
How do you not have I get not having the idea that it's coming, but then when it happens, how are you not like, oh, I remember a year ago when these SB Nation people got laid off? Or like when Reed and Blake were podcasting and they had just signed with SB Nation to be a part of the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network. And what is it, the Finsider SB Nation? And then Finsider just shut the door completely a month into them having their podcast on SB Nation. So, like, everybody in Buffalo Rumblings should have seen what had happened in the past. And, oh, yeah, that's how Vox Media treats people.
Now, so many of these people who were hurt by this, again, all taking the high road, whether it's just a professional decision, whether it's just not in their nature to disparage people who wrong them. I don't have that problem. I don't have that personal affliction. 9 years ago, we started this podcast, which sounds crazy. It was almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
I'm going to be 39 in 2 weeks. That's wild. I am almost 40 years old, and I will have spent... I remember that we recorded our first text episode the day that I helped my girlfriend move out of her ex-boyfriend's apartment into the house that she and I eventually ended up sharing right before we got married. And she was like, "You're going to do a radio thing?" I was like, "Yeah, I got to help you. I got to hurry and help you move because I got to go do this thing with my friend." And she was like, "This sounds dumb." And I'm not going to lie to you, 10 years later, it still sounds dumb. You're going to go and suck down whiskey in a basement and yell about sports? That sounds dumb, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best path is Travis Wingfield's.
Yeah.
Because his wife, same, like, oh, you're going to record, you're going to talk about the Dolphins and then just put it on the internet for people to find it? Yeah, that, okay, like, is that supposed to be a real job? Yes, because now he works for the fucking Dolphins.
It's why.
And then now his wife probably gets it seeing his paycheck.
Yeah, now, finally. But so, we talk about this a lot. We throw it around briefly. But at the time when we started this, it was just a lark. Because podcasting didn't matter yet. Podcasting as a way of sharing information was not yet popular. There was still a handful, right? Like, if you think about what podcasting was, there was only 3 of us in the Bills community. It was Bills and Beers, maybe next year, the Bills Beat, and then us.
And Numb Bills Fan.
So 5. 5 podcasts, all of varying flavors, wildly different aptitudes and personalities, and there was no money in it. There was 0 cash to be made. Like, the Bills Beat was just Joe Buscaglia and, Matthew Fairburn?
I think so.
Just because they were like, hey, we heard this might be something someday. And then they stopped doing it, took a hiatus, and then once it started to make money, came running back. And so it was just, for the longest time, it was just us out here freewheeling. We were freelancers who didn't care that we weren't getting paid. We were doing it because we thought it was fun. And, like, some people figured it out. Bill Burr, widely talked about in comedy as the godfather of podcasting, because he figured out that he could monetize he paid for a service that he could call from his cell phone and it would record up to 30 minutes of him ranting about whatever while he was out working the road, touring, doing whatever. And then obviously equipment got better. Editing software became more readily available. Platforms for podcasting started to grow and become more prominent. People figured out how to get their stuff out there, get their ideas out there, right? First of all, raise a glass to the godfather of podcasting, to Bill Burr.
I mean, I'd claim Bob Kelly, but whatever. To each his own.
You know, Bill Burr did it first, though.
No, I don't know about that.
You better hit the Goog for that one. My own little Jamie Vernon over here. You better hit Google. Whose podcast started first? Bobby Kelly or Bill Burr? So with that in mind, the team improved. Like, the Buffalo Bills got better, and as that happened, more people started jumping onto this. It was kind of kismet. Our team went from being a laughingstock to all of a sudden they were being competitive right at the time when podcasting was starting to pick up steam in a commercial sense. And so it made sense, And just this scene exploded.
You got me on that by 3 years.
Yeah! Got him. Ring him up. So in that wave, the website Buffalo Rumblings, which is a site that I spent years frequenting when I was younger, like the mid-aughts on into like the teens, and a lot of commentary, a lot of discourse. This was before Twitter was even worth using, right? 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. Where you could go and have conversation. And I would also, I would write fan posts, and I would write long-form articles, and I would write things and submit them, and they would get posted, and people would comment, and it was fun. I mean, SB Nation itself goes all the way back to 2003.
March 21st, 2006, Twitter begins.
Okay. Buffalo Rumblings became the Bills branch of that in 2007. Brian Galliford put that together. Never met him, and I'm not trying to be crass, but he's not important. What's important is the fact that that place became a thing that people could produce their own long-form or short-form content, and eventually podcasts, mostly driven by fans who really cared about the football team and really cared about their fellow fan. Just reaching out and touching somebody with an idea, with a quote, with a quip, with an argument. Now, I think if there's a sentiment I want you guys to take away from the show in its totality, this is the thing I've said a lot. All good things in this world are going to die at the altar of a jerk in a suit chasing $1. And that's it. And I think that fact has proven itself time and time and time again. And I think it's with that we have to talk about how the hell did we go from a place where Buffalo Rumblings was making money and everyone loved it and everything was good to a place where you can just unceremoniously dump half of your staff. Because that's not the Buffalo Rumblings that we knew if you were around when it started. And it's certainly what it was, isn't what it was when it was at its peak. I think we have to talk about a couple things. First of all, how tech bros killed media. We got to talk about a guy named Jim Bankoff. And we got to talk about why Chris and I decided that we would rather not get paid at all than work for Vox. See, Vox Media is the parent company that owns SB Nation. And that last part is probably where the conversation starts best. Buffalo Rumblings, with their podcast scene, the last 5 or 6 years, it's been a really great incubator and aggregator of podcasts. They've reached out to a lot of people. They were constantly growing. And it was nice because it gave a lot of people a platform to cut their teeth if they were just getting started in podcasting, because they were just looking for content to fill their feed with. Which is good, because if you didn't already have an established audience, it gave you an automatic, you're going to at least get your name in front of a few thousand people every single week. Whether your show's any good or not, you'll figure out how to sink or swim, but you at least have a built-in audience, and it's a nice incubator for you to grow this thing in. Bruce Nolan, and I don't want to leave out Joe Miller.
Bruce will be on the show next week.
These are two people who have been two of the largest figures on that network. And about 5-6 years ago, when they both first kind of joined and started driving podcasts, or at least when the podcast network started, approached us multiple times about joining their network. And I say 5-6 years ago because I know it was before we joined up with Blue Wire. Now, at the time, Chris and I were kind of reaching that point of where, we have a product. Now we just have to figure out what to do with it. And there were some outlets that reached out to us, Chris, and you probably to a point of frustration. I didn't even give them a time of day, right?
We talked to them on 2 different occasions for joining Vox/SB Nation. Mm-hmm. But the number one killer in that deal ever happening of us being a part of SB Nation was that we would have had to give over the name Rockpile Report to Buffalo Rumblings, which is, for us, is a non-starter.
Well, for you, that might have been the biggest stumbling block, and it's a piece of why I didn't like it. It's just, who owns you? Sure, you're SB Nation, but you're also Vox Media, and I know, from being plugged into this industry, I know so much more about this than most people do. Most of the people working at SB Nation when all of this was going on have no idea who Vox Media or Jim Bankoff is. Like, they don't know these people. But it's important. It's important if you want to know who it is you're climbing into bed with. And I just could never wrap my head around it, right? Like, I could never bring myself. I would rather continue doing this for free than working for a bunch of unscrupulous bastards like that. And I couldn't do it. And so we repeatedly turned him down. Chris, in retrospect, that seems like a wise choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like there's a little intuition. Like intuition, your gut, and what you know about people and companies, you're good to trust it.
Well, like other people that we know within podcasting that have been on the show, specifically Garrett Sisti, who does the Lightning Round Chargers podcast. Whenever we play the Chargers, we reach out to Garrett. He comes on the show. We talk ball with him. He used to work at Vox. Mm-hmm. So we've talked to him, and he's given us some insight. And anytime Vox approached us, no.
The answer was no.
We're good.
Because I don't care what you're selling. This is some kind, like, because I know a Faustian deal when I see one. Yeah, you don't even know what that means, so go ahead and squint at me, you uncultured ass.
I was thinking of Fauci. That's what I had heard. Fauci.
Depending on who you ask, they might not be that far off. But like, when I think about myself in this scenario, because again, it's all about me, right? That's what a narcissist does. They go, I take everything and I make it about myself. But I look at this and I think back to how I started this, how I lost my love for this practice. There are two people to blame for this, directly or indirectly. The first one is Oswego landlord Doug Waterbury, right? Whose appetite for lewd behavior is only surpassed by the size of his bank account. And it's probably, or allegedly, although I don't care if he DNCs me. I'll see. Oh. Chris, his wealth is the only reason he's not in jail. I'm comfortable saying that.
I don't mean to steer the podcast, but I've heard this story from you off air.
And I was going to say, guys, I'm not going to give all the gory details. Get me over a beer sometime, and I'll tell you about Doug.
Well, I found this.
Look at that face. There aren't. Oh.
Look at that. This is from about 2 years ago.
Yes.
Doug,
but hey, what do I know? Hey, what do I know? Like, I don't know a piece of garbage when I see one.
I'll just read the headline. Doug Waterbury, Oswego landlord with history of forcing sex on tenants, arrested again.
But yeah, no, guys, I'll tell the story someday in its totality. For the time being, maybe someday I'll do a podcast about it, right? You ever cross someone or you come across a person in life who a couple times every year you Google their name just to see if they're dead yet? Just to see, like, hey, did that person die yet?
I do that weekly with Drew Gear.
And everyone goes, why? And I go, because I'm going to show up at that funeral and send him off to hell in person. I will be there. Meanwhile, for Bankoff, Jim Bankoff, Vox Media CEO Jim Bankoff, it's just as much him personally as what he represents to the practice of journalism. Rich tech jerk-offs who just show up, find themselves in positions of like journalistic leadership, often buying their way into that position, and time again showing that both their judgment and their leadership sucks. There's no other way to slice this. I mean, let's give you a brief history of Jim Bankoff. This guy worked for AOL Media. Go back to AOL in like the mid-90s. This guy was working there, working in media-related segments of the business. AOL Music, something called Fan House that just died on the vine. just all these failed forms of digital content aggregation until about 2006, where like he was the manager of business strategy and content acquisition when AOL tried to merge with Time Warner and the whole thing just went tits up. And he just bailed. He left as the entire AOL brand just fell apart. Crash burned, Hindenburg style, like it was done.
I have his LinkedIn up.
Oh my God.
Just for you.
Yeah. So he goes from working for AOL, EVP of programming and products, right? Because now he's got a name. So then what happens is he did what most failed executives do, and he becomes a quote-unquote consultant. Because you know, the old adage, those who can't do, teach. Now he goes to work for the Huffington Post and SB Nation in 2008. In 2009, he takes his giant bank account and becomes an angel investor in SB Nation. And conveniently installs himself as the CEO. So Chris, if I came to you, you're running Chris's lemonade stand, and you've got a business, but the model isn't making a ton of money, and you're like, okay, I only have about 6 more months of runway, or my lemonade stand's going to close. And I come along and go, hey, I've got a massive amount of cash I can throw at your lemonade stand. In fact, I can make it better. I can buy you bells and whistles that you can't afford right now. I'm going to revolutionize the way you're selling lemonade.
Are you talking about a windowless van?
A windowless
And we take this shit on the road?
But also, since you don't have the money, I understand that your vision is what made this thing. Your vision and your ability to aggregate is what made this thing. But I've got the money, so I kind of want to be able to call the shots. But that's cool, right? Because your business won't die.
No.
And this has been the problem. Is that Darwinism wasn't allowed to take place. And instead, all these .com, like when the .com bubble burst, there was all of these millionaires left sitting around who had nothing to do, nowhere to go, and most people who knew what they were talking about wouldn't give them a second crack at business. So they became consultants, who then oftentimes you find, like Bankoff here, bought their way into journalism. A rich guy with deep pockets and vision was going to run the show over at SB Nation. This is the guy who developed MapQuest, Chris. What could go wrong? He's a genius. He spent the 2010s making one bad statement after another, one wrong move after another. I mean, first of all, Vox Media gets founded in 2011. And just owns a whole slew of online content outlets like BuzzFeed and The Verge. Because he goes, well, we got to buy other outlets. That's how you get rich. You don't build your own thing. We buy up everyone who is successful.
Sounds like Vince McMahon.
Kind of. Kind of. Except with fewer allegations. Fewer allegations. And then in 2014, they decided, you know what, our model isn't working. We need snackable content. Iman Azizi out there is laughing as he hears this right now. Snackable content. Hey, guys, I know you guys are producing articles over at Buffalo Rumblings, and you're, deep dives into analytics and stats and all these fun things because the technology is now being made available online to aggregate some fine data that wasn't available before. We want you to stop doing that, and instead we want you to start writing articles that are about 500 words and have all of the informational content of a single tweet. Because the more of those we produce, the more ads we can sell, and that'll boost revenue. And if we can boost revenue enough, we can go do other fun things like video and audio. Wouldn't that be fun? Let's just change our model. That became the company Onus. In 2016, they shelved almost all long-form article formats for their websites. So SB Nation as a whole went from a place where you could go have nuanced conversation and read in-depth articles to every article was just a blurb. It's like when someone calls a meeting that should have been an email. It's that, but in a journalistic sense, which is enraging. Because this is what happens when businessmen get involved with the practice of journalism. And then it got worse. Like throughout there, he made a lot of weird, like Chris, if you want to throw some of those screenshots up, he made a lot of really just, like in retrospect, freezing cold takes. Could have a field day with this guy, right? So this is, in 2016, May 4th, this is in the Wall Street Journal. Vox's Jim Bankoff eyes TV and says that there is no new media bubble. Hey guys, the bottom will never drop out of this industry, right? We just have to believe in it enough and invest in it enough and make enough cutthroat decisions that someday we'll get to the end of this, because obviously it's limitless. Chris, doesn't that sound like the kind of guy who would invest in a Ponzi scheme?
Yes.
Doesn't that sound like the type of guy who might lose a company a lot of money in, I don't know, investing in the internet?
Yeah.
These tigers don't change their stripes. They go from one outlet to the next, just saying things. They just say things because and the worst part is they believe them. And in the process of these, everyone calls him brave. Oh, he's such a brave entrepreneur. No, he's a hack businessman who's going to get a lot of people fired and hurt along the way. 2017, Vox decided that we want to do video, right? No more blogging, cut down podcasting, let's focus on video. And then in 2018, they fired all of them who pivoted because Facebook said, hey, we're going to focus on non-political content as part of our algorithm. You're going to see that their problems with social media are, it's a thing. 2020, COVID. This guy had the balls to go to Vanity Fair and say that while they had just lost 30% of their previous year's revenue and that their company valuation was spiraling by the day, they were emerging in a really strong position. Guys, we are definitely considerably better. We're stable. We're stronger than ever. And we're poised to really take advantage of the market. That was in 2020. In 2022, they fired every single SB Nation, Major League Soccer, and NHL website. Shuttered them effective immediately, unless the people running them wanted to pay for the maintenance and upkeep and hosting fees and everything else completely out of pocket. You remember that day.
Oh, yeah.
People lost their minds. And the funny thing is that came, what we later learned, came on the coattails of another failed investment by Jim Bankoff. You see, this guy decided that he was going to go buy a platform called The Dodo. Now, first of all, Chris, only a horse's ass would buy a company called The Dodo. Do you know what they do?
Is that not the, animal rescue videos?
Yes, that is exactly what it is.
Jessica has that all up in her algorithm.
Yes.
There's certain dog videos and rescue videdos. Yeah, I know exactly what that is.
So he spent a giant chunk of the company's liquidity on acquiring this company called The Dodo that was going to make content that he knew was going to be a winner because it's in everybody's algorithm, right? Less than 4 months after he bought The Dodo, Facebook changed its algorithm again and decided that, well, we just kind of bought into some of these other platforms and we see the success of TikTok. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce Reels, and we're going to actually use our algorithm to push short-form content rather than long puppy rescue videos and people cleaning the oil off birds. They're dumb shit. To the point where it was literally now what's known as Meta, which was Facebook at the time. He's in their offices screaming at their advisory panel, who he's working with, about how much money their decision has cost his company. Notice, Chris, it's never his fault. It's never his poor market research. It's never his poor decision making. It's Facebook's fault that this didn't work. And you know who ends up taking it in the shorts? The Buffalo Rumblings podcast community. Because this guy... So that's what I mean. I'm sure that there was another bad decision that we'll find out about in 6, 7, 8 months that led to them having to fire the rest of the podcast community. And it's never this guy's fault.
guy
because he's the CEO, you can't fire him.
This guy sounds a lot like you.
Nothing's ever his fault.
Yeah, no. Nothing's ever your fault. It's always mine.
It's always mine.
It's always the production. Whatever's wrong with this podcast,
guys,
I have nothing to do with it. It's all Chris.
Guys, I'm not going to lie to you. Here's a perfect example of what he's talking about. He's not just being a chick about this. And for those of you women listening to this, you know what I mean. I'm not trying to be offensive or misogynist, but I need you to hear me out. I spent the better part of like a year and a half gaslighting Chris to believe that it was his poor production skill and his poor, like, oh, you didn't know the cables, there's something wrong with the mixer, you're not setting it up properly, because there was an audible buzz in a lot of our podcasting. Do you know what that buzz was? It was my laptop being plugged in too close to the microphone. Do you know how long into the buzz I figured out what it was?
No. Well, when I...
Because that's the real... Like, you want to talk about who's a bad person?
No.
Do you want to know how... Okay.
When I redesigned doing this, and this, I mean, my desk, what you're looking at now, if you're watching on YouTube, it used to be this way. And then I moved it how it is now, and I undid all of the cables that are over by Drew on the other side of the room, and then I had brought them all right here. Right here is where I have our mixer. I brought them all around. All right, I know Drew said he thinks all these cables are bad, and then I test them out just like right here next to me, and they work perfectly fine. So I'm like, all right, it's not anything. Cables are fine. And then after a little bit of research, there's like, depending on the amount of power output from certain items, if they're next to cables, they'll cause interference.
Now, do you know how long into the buzz I figured out what it was?
No.
About 6 weeks. But because I had made such a big deal about it to you, I couldn't just stop. Because obviously I couldn't just be like, oh, hey, man, I made a mistake. That's my fault.
No, you can't admit to that ever.
So what I did was I waited until he moved everything and then just started unplugging my laptop. And I was like, he'll probably just forget about it. And he'll be like, oh, it's because I moved everything.
Yeah.
See, this is called gaslighting, people, and it's bad. And some of us out here, again, you know, Bridget had the audacity to tell me that she goes, "You're not a narcissist. You don't have any issues." I go, oh my God.
How does Bridget not know that about you? You are textbook narcissist. Like if you could have been in your 30s and in good shape in the mid-90s, Vince McMahon would have given you the narcissist gimmick and not Lex Luger.
Yeah. They can't all be winners, folks, right? We can't all be winners. So with that said, this guy has overseen just a litany of disasters for this company, and nobody ever deals with he never deals with the consequences. He's never held responsible. And the trickle-down effect is that now something that people in our community of fans have come to rely on gets destroyed because there's one asshole out there who has to bear who just can't accept responsibility. And I guess that's what I get. He is just the embodiment of the problem with journalism, right? Like, he fails upward, then flails his way through every single aspect of his job, and just wreaks havoc on aspiring and engaged journalists and content creators, to a degree that some of them, like, I've talked to a few people, newer, recent podcasts, who really do feel like the rugs, like, Chris, you and I are kind of dead inside. Like, I know we joke about that, but we also don't have, like, we don't process our own emotions well.
No.
Like, I call it compartmentalization, where it's like, it's really easy for me to take all the things I'm frustrated about and just let them out. But then other things like disappointment or sadness or whatever, I can easily box that up and just stick it in a corner until I feel like going to look at it. It's hard watching other people who are new to this and don't have that callousness struggle with something like this. And I really do feel for these people. I look at this, I think about what it means for the practice itself. I mean, I still have my AP style book from journalism school. One of the things we used to get pounded into our head every day was integrity of the practice and impartial and do things, let people make up their own minds, tell the story, let people draw their own conclusions, present facts, just integrity of the process. I don't even recognize most of what gets printed nowadays. Like, it's hard. And it's, you combine the decay of legitimate journalistic integrity with the dynamic of a bunch of visionless, soulless ghouls who just get to call all the shots regardless of how many times they're wrong. It's like you're taking the candle of the practice and you're going to burn it from both ends. And the entire practice is just becoming a failed state unto itself. So fuck that guy, Jim Bankoff. I've had enough. And to hell with Vox Media, too. This is it, guys. This is why I didn't want to climb in bed with them. And it's tough watching it. It's tough making a choice like that and then knowing that... Because when you say things like that, right, and you watch people being more successful than you, but you're going, I'm siding with integrity. And then the thing that you kind of felt was going to happen happens, and you have to sit back and go, you're processing a whole bunch of things. First of all, you're thinking, that really sucks for these people, first and foremost. Like, you feel for them as people, and you know how much work you put in, so you know how much work they put in, and it's a shitty thing to happen to a group of people who you know are working really hard at something. There's also the point of, I'm a curmudgeon about everything. About everything. About the eclipse, about just April Fool's Day, about work events, about how I interact with other human beings. I'm a curmudgeon most of the time. And there's a small part of me that wishes that sometimes I'd get proven wrong, or at least be proven wrong often enough that I could maybe change, or at least maybe be swayed towards, why don't you ease up a little bit? And instead, now this has left me like Mac from Always Sunny. I'm dug in, and I'll never change. And it's sad that I have to be like this, but it's for my own protection. Because there's entities like this that exist out there. I hate that I was right about them. I hate, just as much as I hate Doug Waterbury for being right about him, and for not having gotten that guy when I had the opportunity to do so. Someday, I'm going to watch them in person. I'm gonna personally send them both off to hell, and then I'll see them there, and I'll raise a glass to that. Chris, Mazel tov. I just have this tweet that I'm looking at from Bruce Nolan. Just says, I've been informed that Vox Media is eliminating the podcast network for Buffalo Rumblings, and by extension, my show on that network. I'm not sure what the future holds for me and the Bruce exclusive, but I love y'all dearly for all these years of listening. Thank you. And someone asked the question, wait, you're not going to talk ball no more? You're one of my favorite Bills content creators. And again, taking the high road, because he's a classy man, comes back and says, I'm not sure, to be honest. What I do know is that I'm incredibly blessed. This community took me in and accepted me, quirks and all. And the outpouring from listeners and viewers and fellow creators has already been something of which I feel unworthy. I think that's what's wildly unfair about this whole thing, is knowing that there's a whole group of people out there who, Chris, let's call a spade a spade. There's people out there who are far better at this than us.
Case in point, Bruce Nolan. We'll be here next week.
Who... Maybe not from a production standpoint, right? Because I would put you ahead of anybody's producer in our community. When you look at the video content that you were able to teach yourself how to create, when you look at the audio production you managed to pull off, and the fact that you managed to make me not just sound like a drunk gorilla on a stool, barking into a microphone.
You know, when I went to broadcasting school in 2005... So part of...
You didn't think this is what you'd be doing with that degree?
No. Part of broadcasting school was like... So I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and it was 4 days a week. I want to say 6 out, like Monday through Thursday, 6 hours, 3 doing radio, 3 doing TV. And you did it for like 12 weeks. And then as I got into it, you know, there was always the TV element of it and learning Final Cut Pro and all of these programs and doing video. And my brain was just like, at that time, 2005.
I don't even think YouTube probably existed, but it wasn't big.
It wasn't what it was. But my brain, because I'm in Atlanta at the time, and my brain is, okay, I'm an intern at 680 The Fan. They are the flagship station for the Atlanta Thrashers. Hockey is my bag. That's what I'm focusing on. And so even during because when you go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, this would be insane now. Like, I'm not even sure if CSB still exists. But a part of going to Connecticut School of Broadcasting, you have access to the studios. So you have studio, and it's for life. So if there is like a Connecticut School of Broadcasting in Buffalo, because I graduated in May of 2005 from their Atlanta campus, I would have access to their studio. So if you think about it now, you could, if you went to CSB, you could essentially do a podcast and just sign out studio time. You don't even need to buy equipment. You could just go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, sign out studio time, record your podcast within their studios. And I never thought about like doing video. I'm like, my brain was so a one-way street to radio because I was interning at the Fan. They had the Atlanta Thrashers. I wanted to get into hockey, and that was one track. Video, Final Cut Pro. Fuck that. I don't need. No, I'm not learning video. And now getting in and out of radio and seeing how fucking cutthroat that shit is.
Yeah.
And then just you and I having our own brand. Now it's like, okay, well, I know my way around audio. It's like I'm teaching myself video production for those that get to watch this on YouTube, which is, depending on the video we put out, you know, is how many people are watching.
You have put an incredible amount of work into this. And I love that. I love that for us. I love it for you. I think I see you legitimately happy like once in a blue moon, and it's always when it's in here.
You're not even here for the fun of it. Is when is tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, because based on my work, this works out perfectly for work schedule. We're doing this on a Wednesday night. Thursday and Friday, my wife's going to go to work, and then I'm going to be here all day Thursday, all day Friday, putting the shows together to put out to YouTube. And then if you're not following the Rockpile Report podcast on Instagram, like I'm editing out reels to put on.
You love this.
And yeah, I just like the editing process. Not to mention we've had 3 videos over 1,500 views on Instagram.
There we go.
Is not bad.
Not shabby considering we just started it.
Yeah.
But here's what I'll say, Chris. I know that this scratches an itch for you, and it does a lot for me. And I think that the network of people we've put together and the community we've built behind this podcast, which just seems stupid. Like, it just seems stupid. And it seems even dumber when I sit here and think about the fact that there are people who do this at a much higher level than we do that don't have a home to do it at anymore. And there's something that feels really wrong about that. There's something that feels unfair. And I mean, you could go back to the movie Unforgiven when Bill Money shoots.
Haven't seen it.
When Bill Money shoots Little Bill and goes, I'm not supposed to die here. This isn't fair. He's like, there ain't no such thing as fair or deserve. He goes, deserve's got nothing to do with it. These people didn't deserve to have this thing happen to them. And it's frustrating to me, right? Like there's a sizable, and part of that is because I know that there's a sizable part of this collection of people. You know, at the top of the show, we talked about how we were part of the impetus of this. Before anybody knew what it was going to turn into or what it could be, we were out there just shucking and jiving and telling stupid jokes and putting dumb sound beds under things. And
so I knew
an hour of O Christmas Tree. An hour of O Christmas Tree.
I knew that this was a possibility because in July of 2013, I was at Helium. I saw Robert Kelly, best comedian. If you guys go robertkellylive.com, go find if he's coming to where you live. I'm telling you, fucking go see him live. Mm-hmm. But he had promotional posters for you know what, dude.
Well, didn't you also talk to Anthony Cumia?
I did see Anthony Cumia at
somebody's show.
Yeah, I went with Reed, and we went to Helium to see Nick DiPaolo, and because Anthony Cumia was seeing a woman that was from Buffalo, they were just in town. Like Nick was playing the club,
and you were asking him about podcasting.
Yeah, I don't even remember. I would like fanboyed out because I had to wait for his lady to go take a dump or a piss, and then he was just left at the bar alone. Because when Jessica and I go to like comedy, I'm always early guy at the club. So show,
of course you are.
10 o'clock show. Let's get there at 9:15. Have a drink at the bar before the show. And I went with Reed. We're at the bar. I could see out of my periph somebody came into the building, and I did like a triple take. I'm like, that's Anthony Cumia, and waited. He was like 4 seats down at the bar from us. He's clearly on a date. Because I have people skills and I know what's happening.
No, because you have the people skills of a hornet. You just are like, I can't wait for her to walk away so I can go over there and get in this guy's face.
100%. She leaves, goes to the bathroom, and I went over and I said something to him about, you know, what he's done for comedy and the comedians, and
which is true.
And yeah, and the development of like the back table, which is what Robert Kelly's You Know What Dude podcast is based on. And I talked to him, chatted with him. Reed took a picture of me and him. I tweeted it out and I tagged him, and then he just like clicked follow. He's clearly our biggest the biggest person that follows our podcast,
which nowadays
account.
Nowadays if you brag about that, people go, "Oh, you're one of those guys."
Yeah. Well, sometimes I like when he shows up in our timeline, I gotta fucking just
you
scroll
gotta
by.
Keep it moving.
It's some of the video content that he shares. I just gotta
keep it moving.
Yeah.
But so in any event, so what I was gonna say is you talked to him about the art of podcasting, and he hit you with this thing of content's the content. Just get it. Just get it.
That was actually...
Was that Louis J. Gomez?
That was Louis J. Gomez.
Oh, my God. The Puerto Rican rattlesnake.
The Puerto Rican rattlesnake.
I love that guy.
That I met at...
See, we both like terrible people.
Yeah, he couldn't do... He's like apparently not big enough around here to be booked at Helium, and he was doing a bar show at Nishi's in Allen, and I went and saw him.
Now, I'll tell you this.
I talked to him about podcasting.
Something you said just struck a thing. So here it is. You're fanboying out over Anthony Cumia. I'm over here. You mentioned the Puerto Rican rattlesnake, and I get all excited. And yet earlier I was just trashing two other human beings because I'm judging their character and their makeup. And I'm wondering, does that make me a hypocrite? Because apparently I'm sometimes also a bad judge of character. Sometimes.
You are terrible.
But
the whole crux of this is July 13. I saw Bobby Kelly, and he handed me... I had no idea what a podcast was, and then when Robert Kelly explained it to me as, just think of this as a radio show, except it's pre-recorded and you just put it on the internet, and then anybody that knows where to find it can go get it, listen to it on their own time. And then my brain went, this is like what I went to school for originally, so I could create my own thing and put it out on the internet, and then people can find it. And then so it wasn't until 2015 when I was working at Casey Machine in Lancaster, and it's like June of 2015, June of 2015, and we're doing work orders that are due at the end of the year, and it's like, oh, we're way ahead of schedule. And I had asked somebody, and I'm like, this is weird that we're doing these jobs it's May, and these are due in October, November. And then it's like, somebody told me, like, layoffs are coming. So I started looking for another job, got a day job, and then started the process of like, hey, because I'm not going to be able to talk about the Bills or whatever, I can definitely press record, make it sound beautiful, and then that's where your stupid ass came in.
And somehow I drunkenly shaded your life.
You don't deserve any of this.
I drunkenly wandered into your life screaming at the top of my lungs about the Mile High Miracle and how we just watched Joe Flacco throw an 80-yard touchdown pass to, was it Jacoby? Who was that wide receiver? He just beat the coverage over the top and forced overtime. And I was like, this is the craziest. Yeah. And I basically demolished a bar, terrorized everybody, and injected myself into every conversation that was going on just to tell them how crazy the moment was.
I don't think any of it mattered until when we started this. I just bought whatever I could. I think I spent like $250. Cables, mics, mixer, doing it. And then when I showed up at your apartment and set everything up to be recorded,
and you saw it. It's like, this is a
it's
real
different
thing.
when you see it. Like, you're like, oh, I can now put my NPR voice on and talk about the Bills. Rex Ryan is
a real horse's ass. So, no, because where you just took us actually is kind of at the crux of how I want to end this. We have been doing this for such a long time. And when we started, we had nothing. We were cobbling together equipment. We were just kind of piecemealing this together. We didn't even really know what we needed. We were just figuring out as we went. And there was no guide. There was nobody to really tell us how to do these things. I was relying on Chris to figure out tech stuff. And Chris was relying on me to figure out content stuff. And we just made it work.
We have our own we have our own lane.
Yeah.
We fucking stay in it.
And the funny thing is that we both got better. Yeah, I will not. I'll come over there tonight and try to Coco the Gorilla my way through editing this thing. There's a lot of the people who just lost their jobs over at Buffalo Rumblings, who just lost their platform, who don't really know where to go right now, who's for better or worse. I mean, sometimes it could just be, even if it's just as a cautionary tale of what not to do when running your own podcast, listen to us as they were formulating how to create their own show. You know, Joe Marino, again, this is narcissist, patting myself on the back. I'll never forget that moment. Sitting at O'Neill's, Joe Marino looks at me and goes, you know, you're the Mel Kiper of Bill's podcasting. And we have that recorded. Chris could clip it if anybody was interested or wants to fact check me.
I'm not looking for that.
Because he was like, he's like, you were doing this thing before anyone knew it mattered or thought it was important. You were just doing it for the love of the game. And because you did it, he's like, I know. I listened to your show when I was like, hey, I'm taking over Locked On Bills. Let's listen to some of the more, like, if I Google Bills podcasts, who comes up first? Well, let's listen to their show and see what they're doing. And I laughed and I was like, well, you definitely avoided all of what we were doing. And he just laughed. I go, no, you're smart. Good man. You wanted to be successful. You avoided all of the stuff that we do. But it's with that in mind that it makes me sad knowing that we started doing this, we got to where we are now, and we took one path. And a bunch of people who took what looked like a different path that had a bigger thing happening with it, all because of a couple figureheads who in my bones I knew couldn't be trusted, just got the rug pulled out from underneath them. And I don't know, I don't know, like I said, it's just hard to reconcile. That's it.
I mean, well, SB Nation's a name. You know the name. So when you have Buffalo Rumblings, we're part of SB Nation, and they reach out and say, "Hey, we've listened to your podcast. We'd like you to add you to the network." And you see the bright light of, my podcast is going to be affiliated with SB Nation.
And for someone who still cares about the process and about the thing and all of this stuff that we're out here doing, I think it's what's, like, to me, this is all just, frankly, it's disgusting. It's gross. It's insulting. The way that this was all executed, the fact they were given no notice. It was just one morning you wake up and find out this thing you do that you like, beat it. And then they shoo you off the porch with a broom like you're a fucking bum. It's the ethos of Vox Media on display. The thing that I always knew they were capable of. And I think it's what's lost, and this isn't just a podcast or two. It's not just a few guys who won't be able to cobble together something and figure out how to get themselves platformed and then figure out how to align themselves with someone who can pay them to do it or make it worth their time. Or maybe they're just so disenfranchised by the whole thing they quit. Maybe somebody out there who really was good at this quits because this thing, they got to see how the sausage gets made and it turns them off. It happens in every industry. It's not just those losses. You also lost kind of a proving ground for people, a place for people to go and learn how to do this thing. And I hate it. I hate it because I recognize the fact that, Chris, we are not the best to sit here and do this.
No.
And I think that there's a lot better people who, if given the opportunity, could be something. I mean, guys, real talk. He mentioned Travis Wingfield earlier. Travis Wingfield loves us for no other reason than when he was started out as a freelance journalist at the Palm Beach Post, we gave him the time of day. Now, our friends Gary and Kyle Smith put us in touch with him, and they said, we know a guy who writes for a paper on a freelance basis. Maybe you'd be willing to have him on your podcast. He's a Dolphins guy. He could give you some inside stuff or his takes. So we started talking to him, and he was really good. So we had him on as a recurring guest. And then one day he came to Chris and was like, Chris, can you, what do I need to do my own podcast? So Chris walked him through, okay, well, you buy a mixer and you need a microphone and you need this and you need to do this. And I'll show you software that you can edit. And he and I would go back and forth about content structure and just how do you do this? And now he is bigger than Chris Brown, but he holds Chris Brown's position with the Buffalo Bills. That's him.
For the Dolphins.
And so it's one of those things that for everybody who says, oh, this is just a stupid hobby, you don't know that. There might be some people out there who, without the proper collaboration, without the right foundation to build what they have, they might not have anything. Maybe he's still living in the Pacific Northwest with his wife and his kid, trying to figure out how to be a freelance journalist. I don't know. I'm not going to live in the past, and I'm not going to try to look backwards, but what I will say is there needs to be more opportunities. Anytime you lose opportunities for people to learn and to grow, you suffer. Our fan base will suffer, the people who enjoy content that's not mainstream media. People involved who have potential will suffer because they may never realize it. And to me, that's probably the saddest thing. So, once again, all good things in this world die at the altar of a jerk in a suit chasing a dollar. And yet with that, Chris, I think what I'm going to do is I'm sitting here sipping whiskey and talking about this. I think it's not like it's oh, I tie you an obligation or anything like that, but I think this summer we're going to spend a lot of time collaborating with people. I think there's going to be a lot of collaboration with especially the SB Nation crew, who just, I've already talked to a couple of them. I'm going to keep reaching out and putting olive branches out there because I think that this is important. And I think getting people who have the potential for this, getting them out there and in front of other people is half the battle, isn't it?
Yeah.
So with that said, I don't know, whatever I can do to make this podcast. Guys, if you're listening to it and you're one of the people who are impacted, reach out to us at Rockpile Report on Twitter, rockpilereport716@gmail.com. If you're just someone who ever thought about starting and you didn't know where and you were flirting with the concept of it, reach out. Let's talk about it. Let's get together and at least have a conversation, because I just believe that if you have that itch, you should be able to scratch it, right? You were kind enough to give me that, and I feel like this might be my and our way of maybe giving something back. I don't know. Like I said, I'm just sick and I'm disappointed, because this whole thing is, like I said, it's the bad thing you knew would happen inevitably. You're happy you're not swept up in it, but then there's also a form of guilt where you go, it's like survivor's guilt. Why not me? Chris, why hasn't Blue Wire axed us entirely? I don't even think they know what the hell we're doing over here.
No.
They have enough problems that they're not worried about what we're doing. As long as their checks don't bounce, I don't care, right?
Yeah.
Agreed?
Yep.
All right. So, guys, once again, if you're out there, reach out. Don't be a stranger. And for those out there who are, I don't know, I want to hear your opinions. How are you as fans, podcast fans, impacted by all of this stuff? I'd be interested to see it. Tweet at us at Rockpile Reporter. Send us an email. I'd just be interested to know how this impacts the community who thrives on content and uses that content to get to know and understand and appreciate, in some cases, their team a little bit better, and just having a lot of that taken away. I don't know. I'm curious. Guys, this has been a little bit cathartic. I should say that. And I hope that the people affected by this can find some comfort in the fact that at least there's people like myself, Joe Marino, the cover ones of the world, who are willing to try and help. I don't know. Hopefully it does something for you. But I'm with you. I feel you. And I'm really sorry that this happened to everybody involved. Guys, this has been, well, it hasn't been fun. It's been a diatribe. But we got to get out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. And this has been your Rockpile Report.